God's Ten Commandments law contains principles that are binding upon all people and all ages. And remember, when Apostle Paul describes God's law in Romans 7 verse 12, so then, the law is holy, the commandment is holy, righteous, and good. Hello friends, this is Xavier Meyen from the Hope Truth Perspective. We will discover the question, was God's law to endure or to be abolished? So stay tuned in this video, my friends, as we will discover the answers that can be found in the Bible alone.
The ingredients para makilala nato ang atong Diyos is by faith. And no other than is by faith made human. The Bible will teach us the true essence or the true meaning. Kini nga libro, mao ang atong Diyos, which is our beloved Jesus Christ. Kasi when we say pure in heart may sunan, these are the sinless. Bro.Xavier Meyen.
And this is the Hope Truth Perspective. In these last days, many of us are confused towards God's law. Question number 1. For how long were God's commandments established? Let's open and read our Bible in Psalms 111 verse 7 to 8. The works of his hands are faithful and just. All his precepts are trustworthy. They are steadfast forever and ever, done in faithfulness and uprightness. So the verse is very clear. They are standing and steadfast forever and ever. So what was Christ's personal attitude towards the law of 10 commandments? Let's read it again in the book of Psalms 40 verse 8 and John 15 verse 10. David uttered a prophecy of Christ which says, I desire to do your will, O my God. Your law is within my heart. I have obeyed my Father's commands and remain in his love. And that is the personal attitude of Jesus Christ towards the 10 commandments. He is faithful to it. He remained in his Father's love. He didn't break any of it. Now the question, did Christ come to abolish any part of God's law? So let's discover together if Christ break any part of God's law. The answer is found in Matthew 5 verse 17 to 19. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them but to fulfill them. I tell you the truth, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen, will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Anyone who breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. The law mentioned here included all that Moses and the prophets had. He did not come to set aside any of it or abolish it. He fulfilled the ceremonial types and shadows written in the book of Moses as their great antitype. The 10 Commandment law he fulfilled through perfect obedience. And he fulfilled what the prophets had written of him when he came as the Messiah and the Savior of the human race. So what does it mean to fulfill when applied to God's law? To fulfill means to do, to perform, or to act in accordance with. Paul says in Galatians 6 verse 2, carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. Christ's act of being baptized was a fulfilling of righteousness. God's great moral decalogue is eternal, whereas ritual laws are just temporary. And if you read Ephesians 2 verse 15, all typical laws was ended. What is another proof of the enduring nature of God's law? If we read it in book of Ecclesiastes 12 verse 13 to 14, it is the fact that God's law is the standard of the judgment, rather than abolish the law. What was predicted that he would do with it? Prophet Isaiah says in chapter 42 verse 21, it pleased the Lord for the sake of his righteousness to make his law great and glorious. To make his law glorious and great. So how did Christ magnify the law? In chapter 5 verse 21, 22, 27, and 28 of Matthew says, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to his brother, Raka, is answerable to the Sanhedrin. But anyone who says, You fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. You have heard that it was said, Do not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. And that's how Christ magnifies the law. Now the last question. Will God's righteousness will ever be abolished? Lift up your eyes to the heavens. Look at the earth beneath. The heavens will vanish like smoke. The earth will wear out like a garment, and its inhabitant dies like flies. But my salvation will last forever. My righteousness will never fail. Hear me, you who know what is right, you people who have my laws in your heart. Do not fear the reproach of men or be terrified by their insults. Moral law is related to relationship that exists between the Creator and the creature and the creatures. If we read Matthew 22 verse 36 to 40 and Romans 13 verse 8 to 10, the Decalogue rests on the principle of love to God and impartial love to one's fellow beings. Hence, it defines duty towards God and duty towards his fellow human beings. Just as long as this relationship shall exist, just so long shall moral law will exist. Defining these two obligations, according to Romans 3 verse 31, faith does not abrogate God's law, but it causes it to stand, says David in Psalm 219 verse 172. May my tongue sing of your word, for all your commands are righteous. Obedience to God's law was not be merely an outward compliance, rather a genuine heart service. According to Matthew chapter 5 verse 21 to 48, perfection involves every thought as well as every action.